This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with Mr. Tyus Butler, conducted by Fran on May 23, 2006, and appropriate to Mr. Butler's longtime tenure as Director of Alumni Relations at the University of Georgia. We are today in the beautiful Ray Nicholson House, home to the university's Alumni Relations program. Thank you so much for being with us today, Mr. Butler.
Glad to be here.
You know, there's always a question about where to start when we have so much to talk about, but why don't we just start at the beginning, and that would be your beginning. Tell us a little bit about your family and growing up.
Well, we'd have to go back a pretty good ways. I was born in Carrollton, Georgia, but my father died when I was only 3 years old, and my mother moved back to Griffin, which was her home, although she had been born in Tyus, Georgia, which is a little community in Carroll County. And my sister and I grew up in Griffin. And I don't think there's a better place to grow up than Griffin was in those days. It was small, but large enough to have the accommodations that you want in a town. But I grew up with many, many friends. Went to 4th Ward School, then to junior high, graduated from Griffin High School, and after graduating from high school, I received a scholarship to Oglethorpe University and went there my freshman and sophomore years. And those were really among the most delightful years I've had, because Atlanta was not Atlanta of today, thank goodness. It was actually a small town in comparison then. And it was a good town to be in college. But I wanted to go into the field of journalism. I had an older first cousin who was publisher of newspapers in Columbia, South Carolina, and his brother handled all the circulation for the papers. And I became interested in journalism. Added to that, Dean Drury was from Griffin, born and grew up in Griffin, and in fact, his father and my grandfather were in the business, cotton business, for many, many years together. Cotton brokerage, cotton warehouses, that's when cotton was king. And so I was interested in coming to the University of Georgia, where Dean Drury was dean of the School of Journalism. And so that got me to the university.
So you ended up in Athens?
Ended up in Athens, and except for 3 years I was in the Army in Italy and North Africa during the war. I've been in Athens most of the time since then, except for some additional graduate work that I did, first at LSU and then at the University of Wisconsin, and finally just before right after I got out of the Army at Emory in Atlanta.
Talk to us a little bit about what life on campus at the University of Georgia was like in the 1930s when you were here.
Well, I'll tell you, it was certainly a lot calmer, in my opinion. There was no downtown Athens like Athens of today, but the varsity was still there. You can get a hot dog for 5 cents, a hamburger for 10 cents, and a chili dog for 15 cents. You'd be surprised, a lot of people be surprised what a hot dog would cost you today at the varsity or anywhere else. But I guess there was maybe 3,000 students at the university, something of that size. I have forgotten the exact number. But it was certainly small enough the way you knew just about every student here at the university. I lived in Joe Brown Dormitory and moved in, I think, the first year after it was built. So it was a delightful place to be. It was just down the hill from the journalism building, so it was easy to get to for classes. I was never late because of the closeness. And we walked from Joe Brown down to the stadium. It had only two sides then in the stadium, and
no sky suites.
no, nothing besides just the basic stadium itself. And the thing about it was, students could almost sit any place they wanted to. There was the season ticket holders and regular ticket holders who bought tickets to the game, but there was plenty of room left on either side of the stadium, so you could sit on the north side or the south side, any way you wanted to almost. And those were interesting games. One of the most interesting games was when we played at LSU, and oddly enough, I wound up getting my master's at LSU. But LSU used to have a bat factory here, just a little small bat factory, but they had miniature bats that they gave out that particular week to all the students. And when LSU at the last beat Georgia, there was a big fight and wanted to tear down the goalpost. There were big fights, but the LSU lost because a lot of them had knots on the head from those baseball bats. But the LSU team, the LSU Cadet Corps came over on the train, parked down at the stadium, at the station here in Athens, and in Cadence, it was a military school, and marched up the hill, and then they marched down the hill, but they marched a little slower going down than they did coming up.
Talk about the Greek system, Greek life here. Was the fraternity and sorority system?
Oh yes, it's probably it was stronger then than it is now.
Larger percentage of folks participating?
The percentage of the people belong to either fraternities or sororities, and they had more activities than they seem to have today. But I would say that it was a stronger organization then than it is now.
I recall my dad talking about the student government. When student government elections were held, there was a strong, there was a Greek contingent, and there was a campus
yes.
non-Greek contingent. It was very hotly contested, and it was a good kind of a contest.
That's right, and as I say, it was a division of the student body based on primarily whether you belonged to a fraternity or did not.
Some of the campus traditions of that time, I know, rat caps.
Yeah. I didn't have to have a rat cap because I came here as a junior, but the rat caps were passed out to freshmen, and so that departed away somewhere along the line. It's no longer followed.
Now you could take your rat cap off after your freshman year, was that right?
Yes, you just had to wear it the 1 year that you were a freshman, then the next year's freshman class got all the attention.
How about a shirt tail parade?
Yeah, they had many a shirt tail parade out Prince Avenue and down Lumpkin Street and the like, and that was just part of the entertainment.
So the gentlemen stripped off their pants and wore long shirt tails and then had to run, is that right?
Well, they
freshmen
had
again?
Usually just freshmen in the shirt tail parade, and you had all sorts of outfits. But if it was just males running, they didn't have near as much crowd as you would have had if the women were participating. But one of the things, I said I lived in Joe Brown, right across the hall from Asa Candler and Clyde Spinks of the Candler family and the like, and also right close to our room was Jim from down at Gillis, Soperton, from Soperton. His father was head of the highway department.
You had quite an interest in Hall.
Yeah, I did.
Talk a little bit, Little Commencement was...
That was the biggest and one of the most delightful weekends of the whole year. But we had the top bands, and a band then played music. Bands today don't play music. They just make noise. But Tommy Dorsey, Kemp, and any number of them from, in fact, the first time I saw or heard was Frank Sinatra was here in Athens when he was here with, I guess it was Tommy Dorsey. And so that was a big weekend. And it was a very entertaining one and a delightful one. That came in the spring. That was long spring commencement, not spring holidays and the like.
Where would you do a big party like that?
It was in Woodruff Hall. Woodruff Hall, yeah. And Woodruff Hall was one that breezes could come in from any angle, north, east, south, or west.
Ventilated.
Ventilated, yeah.
All right, so you finished at Georgia in 1935,
yeah,
is that right?
And
then, did you go straight to LSU to graduate school?
No, I worked 1 year at on the Calhoun Times when Roy McGinney was the editor and owner of the paper, who was a delightful person. Then a second year at the Cedartown Standard in Cedartown. And I still have a lot of friends in both cities friends I made when I was with the two papers. But when during the time that I was on the Cedartown Standard, I decided I wanted to get my master's. And so I picked LSU, and I couldn't have picked a more entertaining and delightful places to go. Now, New Orleans is a little rough right now to go to New Orleans, but back then it was just 80 miles up the Mississippi River at Baton Rouge, where LSU was. And so many a weekend was spent in New Orleans. But well, New Orleans, LSU, Huey Long saw to it that LSU got some of the top professors in the country. Clint Brooks and others of the top-notch value were there. And one of the professors I had either at LSU or later at Wisconsin, it's been so long I can't remember which one, told me something I'd never forgotten. He was in charge of placement, class placement of freshmen that came into the university, whether LSU or Wisconsin. And he gave them all vocabulary tests. And those that made the highest marks on the vocabulary test he put in his own class, and those that made the lower grades he put in other people's classes. So, and that leads me to a story. When I was teaching journalism here at the university, back then Time magazine every year sent out a very detailed vocabulary test. And I always ordered it early and gave it to my students there I was teaching the introductory journalism course, reporting course. And so I got this Time vocabulary test and gave it to my students and then graded, and we went over it in class, because in my opinion, a person is educated if he is excellent in the field of a vocabulary. and my wife is one of those who is
is.
very good in that. But anyway, several weeks after I had given out the test and the students had taken it, the English department gave it. And then when it was over, the professor, there was just one professor, I've forgotten which one, the professor said, and he read out the names of all the ones who were right at the top of the things, said, hold up your hands. And many, 20 or 30 or more of the students held up their hand. Then he went around and said, now what is your major? Journalism, 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 journalism. Everyone was in journalism. So he was a little stymied about that.
All right, so you went to LSU for your master's degree,
I
is
got
that
my
right?
master's at LSU. Then, as I say, Dean Drury, with the Griffin connection and the fact that his father, my grandfather, were in business together, he wrote it out of the blue and asked me if I would come to the university to teach journalism. And I was delighted to come back here, particularly. And so I came back here as a journalism professor and taught for many years. Along the way, I was also made director of alumni relations, and for a while I was a half and half, but it wasn't 50 and 50 adding up to 100. It was about 75 and 75 adding to 150. So I had to make a choice. And I knew that I would get more entertainment out of being alumni director, so I then was alumni director and was alumni director for, I guess, 25 or 30 years.
I was going to ask you to go back and talk a little bit about Dean Drury.
Well, Dean Drury was one of the most interesting people and one of the most delightful teachers. And the journalism program then, we had only about 4 teachers. There was Dean Drury, there was Ed Krause, who also directed plays and taught drama. There was Willett Kempton, who came down from Wisconsin and taught. Worth McDougal came in a little later to teach radio and so forth. But there were only at most 4 or 5 professors. I asked a recent dean of the journalism school about the number of professors the journalism school had then, and he said 65. Well, I can't imagine. You have to take every course and chop it up a dozen ways to put 65 professors in a limited curriculum of that sort. But one of the things that I'm proudest of, so many of the students I had then, now are 30 and 40 and 50 so years old, but still very close friends. Billy Morris and I have been very close friends ever since I had him as a student. And
that'd be Morris newspaper.
Morris, yeah, now owns all the Morris newspapers. Well, Dink Neesmith, another one that's here in Athens and owns a number of smaller newspapers. But so many of the students I had not only were students, but they became close friends. And I've enjoyed them all during these years.
Well, that segues right into, I have a quote that I found from a March 1987 column by Jesse Outler, who was longtime sports writer.
He was one of the students I had.
For the Atlanta Constitution, and he said Dean John E. Drury and Tyus Butler were his favorite professors in the Henry Grady Journalism School. It was a great compliment because, of course, he wrote sports for the Journal-Constitution for both of those, I guess, for years.
For a long, long time. Well, I would hate to try to stop and name names.
Remember
because
everybody?
I would leave out some, but there are many, many students of that type that I still run into and see and enjoy, and thankful I had them as students.
Well, you were on the faculty from 1939 to 1955. Is that correct?
That's about right.
I know. And you also mentioned earlier, I was going to ask you about this. You were away during the Second World War. I was going to ask you how the war had affected campus prior to your leaving.
Well, as you know, it started December the 7th, 1941, and I left in 42. So I wasn't around too long, but the graduating class, they just moved up, and a lot of them, instead of going the full 4 years, went 3.5 or 3 and a fraction, and they graduated them early, and most of the men went right on into the Army. But I went into the Army, and thank goodness I was not sent to the Pacific. I went to the Mediterranean and was in North Africa, and then with the American Fifth Army through almost the entire Italian campaign. But after the war was over in Europe, which ended in April 12th, 1945, I got myself transferred to the University of Florence because the armed forces had set up a school, because all these soldiers were over here, the war was over, but the war in the Pacific was still going on. And you were sitting there not knowing whether you were going home, going to the Pacific, or where. But they wanted to do something with the soldiers until the decision was made what to do. And they set up a school tied in with the University of Florence. And I spent the last 6 months of 45 in Florence, and that was the best part of the war. That was the best part.
What a wonderful place to be.
Yeah.
You came back and then taught until 55, and as you mentioned, you split time. And I was going to ask, you were named Director of Alumni Relations in 1956, Mr. Butler, is that right?
That's about it. I think 56 probably would be the year. It was the latter 50s, but...
Well, you'd already been doing the Alumni Magazine for years.
I edited the Alumni Magazine while I was still teaching in the journalism school.
We have a very old alumni organization, don't we? One of the oldest alumni societies.
Just like this is one of the oldest universities.
Right.
But a lot of credit should be given to Bill Crane. Bill Crane kind of organized the alumni organization, and as I say, since I was editing the alumni publication, I worked closely with him. And then Howell Irwin came to me and said, we want to set up an alumni society tied in more with the university, because it was here and it was on campus, but it wasn't a close tie-in with the university administration and organization and the like. And so Howell Irwin was asked as a foundation trustee to decide kind of what should be done, and he came and asked me if I was being interested in being the alumni director. So I was the first alumni director. Bill Crane was referred to as alumni secretary. But Bill Crane deserves a lot of credit for what he did during his years serving as alumni secretary.
What was Mr. Crane's job on campus? Actual job?
It was alumni secretary.
And that's all he did?
That was a full-time. But I mean, he had some outside interest. He owned houses and rented and things of that sort, but that was his full-time job here on campus.
I had looked up the alumni organization history, and it was originally formed in July of 1834, and I believe it said that we were the fourth college to establish an alumni society. But the very interesting thing that it said was that for that first alumni meeting in 1834, the people who attended, there was a representative from every class, and they asked those who had attended previously to send books or to send interesting science type exhibits, those kinds of things. And I guess they were just building, helping to build our library and our scientific laboratories and those kind of things. So,
well, I think that's right. We were on the second and third floor of academic building. That's where the Alumni Society was at that time. And as it grew, the space got smaller and smaller and smaller. And fortunately, the business manager who was here about a little later in that period decided that the old field house was a place that they could move the Alumni Society. So I walked over there. It had been used to put birds and animals and everything else in there. The smell was terrible. It also was a dressing room for the football team when they were practicing, practicing. So it was not, it needed a lot of perfume. But I told this person, I said, this business manager, I was trying to think of his name, but I can't now. I said, well, if you'll fix up this field house and make it suitable for an alumni office for an institution like the University of Georgia, I'll move there. And they did. They fixed it up, and I stayed the rest of my time in the field house, what was the field house, and its location right there next to the Coliseum, next to the Georgia Center. It was a perfect location, and it suited me fine, and I didn't push for any further moves.
It looked mighty fancy the last time, right before they tore it down.
Yeah, and they got an academic building for athletes there now,
right,
which Vince Dooley was the one responsible. It's named for him, I believe.
Actually, for Rankin Smith.
It's named for Rankin. Rankin
Smith
put up the money, that's right.
Well, I know that during your tenure, maybe the greatest growth the Alumni Society ever had. New chapters were added, the staff grew, you had a number of different programs and activities, including alumni seminars and also the alumni tour programs.
Well, I modestly will say that I started the alumni tour program. I started the alumni seminar program, which is the best thing that the Alumni Society has ever had. This Jane Wilson, who came here and just been made an honorary member of the University of Georgia student body, she and her husband started coming up here with another couple from Albany to the alumni seminars. And when I saw her just the other day, first thing she told me, says, "You're the reason I got interested in the University of Georgia." And we really had a quality program because it was an academic program headed by some of the top faculty here at the university, and we brought down some of the top personnel in the whole United States. Kissinger, for example, but some of them a lot better than he was. And we had 400 and 500 people come to those seminars, and many of them were not alumni, but who got interested in the university because of the seminars.
Talk about how you got interested in the tour program. idea?
Well, I'd been to Italy and North Africa.
Want to go back?
But I was hoping when I was in the Army to be sent to England because I was very interested in going to the British Isles. So I just got the idea. I saw what some other alumni, college alumni were doing. So I decided to start a tour program. And I went to one of the agencies here in town. Well, Bob Argo, the one he owned downtown there, and said I wanted to start a program. So we started it, and it started small, but it grew and grew.
It did.
And then Claude came along, and it expanded. It exploded. And my wife was all in favor of it because she went with me. But we haven't been to Antarctica. We have been within about 20 miles of the North Pole. But we've been to just every continent, just about every continent except Antarctica. And so I've seen the world very inexpensively.
It's a great idea.
And and the thing about it is a lot of those people who went on alumni tours were non-alumni. They were friends of alumni and they went along with their friends. But those people became interested in the university as a result of that program. But
you were friend raising, and eventually I'm sure some of those resources ended up in the fundraising.
Oh yeah, a lot. Well, just look at what Jane Wilson and Harry, before he died, gave $1 million, and any number of them joined the Alumni Society and continued to support it. But let me go back. I'm backing up here because I had some notes here. Some of the old-time teachers, Uncle Tom Reed, who was here for years and years and a delightful person. He was a Phi Delta Theta, so Phi Delta Theta's got a lot of good handling if it came up to Uncle Tom Reed.
Was he the registrar?
Registrar, yeah. The university really was run in those early days I'm talking about, my period, not the 1800s. J.D. Bolton and his assistant Madge Lesher just about ran the university and did successfully. I said earlier that Ed Krause not only taught journalism but directed plays and taught drama and the like. John Talmadge, who was on the advertising staff of New York Times for many years but was from Athens originally, came down and taught journalism first and then taught English. I took a course under Merton Coulter, who was one of the best history teachers I've ever had. Hugh Hodson, nothing can be said in the field of music that you don't include Hugh Hodson as Lamar, and also in art. Merritt Pound in political science, and I see young Merritt Pound Jr. Here at the Country Club all the time, but I had courses under him, and he was an excellent teacher. W.O. Payne was a history teacher that did one of the best jobs of any of them in the history department, and the most he had, I think, was a master's degree, but he was a master teacher. Merle Pruney in geography, Walter Martin, also in history, but also was Dean of Arts and Sciences, and later became the president of Valdosta State. Preston Brooks, who went by the name Puny Brooks for some reason,
After whom Brooks Hall is named, is that right? Or is that,
Oh
was
yeah,
that
that's the one. He was dean.
Rhodes Scholar
And he was dean of the business school. I took some courses under him, and actually when the war came along, he came to me, he says, now can you teach this introductory business course? I said, yes, I can teach it, but I probably won't be here. Then Pistol Jenkins, John Pistol Jenkins. You've heard the story about how I got the name Pistol.
You need to tell that.
Well, he had a class, and that was in business and economics. Had a class, classes, I don't know whether it's one or more than one, that they just were not doing a good job at all. And he got kind of, he wasn't paying much attention in class, so he says, we're going to start having 2 a day, one in the daytime at the regular hour, then we're going to have one at night. So they started and made all this, tried to make all the students come back for the night session after they've already had a day session. Well, that went on a week or two until one night, all of a sudden, while the class was going on, all the lights went off. Somebody pulled off all the lights and somebody shot a pistol. Bang, 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 bang. That ended the night's classes. From then on, he was known as Pistol Jenkins. But the one professor, if I had to pick one professor who was the most intelligent, delightful, entertaining, and worthy of the title professor, it was Calvin Brown in English. He was a Rhodes Scholar, but he grew up in Mississippi, and he and William Faulkner, who in those days went by the name Billy Faulkner, not William Faulkner, but his brother, he and Calvin were the closest of friends all the way through the time that he was growing up and going to college. Another one that we should mention is Pope Hill. Pope Hill is taught statistics, and he said if you flip 100 pennies, it'll come up 50 heads and 50 tails. Well, you know that's not true. But he also, every day, he, in that math class that he taught, he'd go to the window, take a piece of chalk, and throw it out the window. He says, now one day that chalk is going up instead of down. And I had a roommate who was in one of his classes. His name was Marcus Lynch, also from Griffin, and he evidently wasn't paying much attention, so he said, Mr. Lynch, go with that window, stick your head out and get some air. Then Murray Sewell, you know, headed the agricultural program here at the university and got it started and going. Then Mitt Jernigan was Professor Jernigan's son, and he and Dan McGill and Rufus Payne and that group that grew up together, they used to play some card game. It wasn't poker or anything, it was something of that sort. But nobody could beat Mitt Jernigan. Mitt Jernigan won every game. The only person who could beat Mitt was a black shoeshine man whose name was Axe Handle. Axehead was what he was called. He's the only one who could beat Mitt Jernigan. But Preston Stevens, math, and later was dean of the graduate school. but let's see now. Maybe I'll let you.
How about Bill Tate? How about Dean Tate? I know
well,
you've got some stories.
my wife, when I left home, she says, "Don't forget Bill Tate." Well, you don't ever forget Bill Tate. Well, Bill Tate was a dean of men, and he was a perfect dean of men, in my opinion, here at the university. If a student did something that needed to be punished, he gave a correct, fair punishment. But as soon as the punish period was over, or whatever it was, Dean Tate was the first one to go to him and say, "Now come back to school and finish up." He didn't lose touch with him. He kept in touch with him. And as I say, he would give the punishment, but then he would try the best to get the student to come back and finish up. So Dean Tate was and he knew everybody in the state of Georgia. And so you never forget Dean Tate, and I should have mentioned him a lot earlier than I did.
He went to Georgia and ran track here as a skinny boy, is what the story is. And then over time, I remember him from my days here in a baseball cap with a big tummy.
Oh yeah. And when they had the integration problem, he did more than anybody to get it smoothed out and handled without it getting out of hand. So he deserves a lot of credit, and naming this building for him is justified.
Right thing to do. He taught English, Mr. Butler, is that right? And then became Dean of Men after that?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Mr. Butler, in your opinion, what were the 2 or 3 most institutional changing events on our campus during your time here?
Well, one, naturally, was the tremendous growth of both the student body and the faculty. And the what was the other that?
Subject matter.
Oh, and the faculty, and also the expansion of faculty in every direction of the subject matter that needed to be taught, because there are many schools here that were not schools when I was in college, and you get down to departments, and as I say, they break them up into narrow fields and make a department out of them.
And you mentioned the integration.
And the integration time was after the basketball game, and when Hamilton Holmes and Charlene Hunter. I had Charlene Hunter, incidentally, in journalism classes, and she did a good job. But when they came on campus, again, it was Dean Tate that settled a lot of the problems that night when almost riot broke out on campus, particularly with Georgia Tech having won a basketball game in the last second on one of these overhand 30-yard shots. But those are some of the things. I know there are many more if I stop and think about them. But
talk to us a little bit about the presidents that you knew while you were here on campus.
Well, when I was here as a student, Harmon Caldwell was president, and he was a very dignified person, typical of many college presidents across the country. But then he left to become chancellor of the university system, and Dr. Adderhole, I guess, was the next one, and Dr. Adderhole was a far better president than many people gave him credit for. He studied and evaluated and then acted, and did a great deal to enlarge the program of the university. But he was a very fine person who did a lot for the faculty of the university. He had the faculty in his mind, and he was a friend of the faculty, and he was a good president.
Then Dr. Davison?
Well, Fred Davison was a very close friend of mine because by then I was alumni director during some of that period, and he and I went over the state to alumni meetings together a lot. He and I went to meetings in San Francisco and Los Angeles and places like that. So I got to know him on a personal basis, and we remained very close friends from then on, the whole time. And the same was true of Diane, a delightful wife. Bess had a hold to go back. A lot of credit needs to go to her too, because as the wife of a president, she did a lot for the university there.
I guess it was during the Adderhold term that the president's home was purchased or given on Prince Avenue. Was that right?
That's right. And I think he was the first one to
live there?
To live in there. It is my recollection.
Right. So, how about the 2 or 3 most exciting events? It may be a football game or a time that you remember.
Well, a lot of the football games
Right.
were really exciting if we won, more exciting than if we lost.
That's the truth.
But one of the things, right after the war, and all a lot of the students who came back or entered the university had been in the army or in the armed forces. And so they were more mature, they were more serious, and they made wonderful, very good students. But some of the Army tanks had been left and placed on the campus here, old relics from the war, and some of the students would get in those tanks and drive them over the campus. And they called out the police, and the police came, and they had their little pistols, and they'd shoot the pistols, and it'd hit the tank and just pop off like a air gun type thing. And the police would hide behind a tree. Then that tank would hit a tree that was bigger than the one he was hiding behind, and just knock it over. So he'd take off and look for a bigger tree.
Now that sounds more exciting than some of the things I remember. I'll say that.
So it was an interesting time when those students decided to GIs decided to ride those tanks around another thing. Now the other thing you're talking about exciting, at least it's interesting. I don't know about exciting. You remember the art department brought down a sculptor, an iron sculptor. And one of the things he wanted to do to leave his mark on the university was he sculptured iron sculpture of a horse. And the horse was placed on campus, here on South Campus. Well, some students had go over there and put hay there for the horse to eat, and a lot of things like that. And the sculptor got very upset, and so what they finally did, they took the horse and moved him out here to Jack Curtis's farm down in Greene County, or wherever it is down there. And so that horse incident was quite an interesting time.
Do you remember a story about Herman Talmadge pushing a piano down Lumpkin Street? Is that one you've ever heard?
I think I've heard it, but I have no details of it.
I'm sure that's one in our family that has been passed around. So a lot of interest in the court, because of course a lot of the governors, a lot of the political
as I say,
folks from
Carl Sanders, Ernie Vanderver, any number of them have been close friends of mine since I was here. A lot of with them either as a student or as a professor, and so they've remained friends all along.
Through the years. What other worthy remembrances? Claude, you got any suggestions? We don't want to let Mr. Butler get away without picking him real good.
Where did, when he was a student, where did they eat?
Well, they had Denmark.
Is that the beanery?
And yeah, that was a beanery. But in town, Tony's restaurant was the best place to eat, and Tony's restaurant reigned there a long, long time. And Varsity was right across where it still is, but no women. In the early days, a woman would not darken the door of Varsity, and her date or somebody had to go in and bring out what the women wanted. But they had several restaurants. Another one was up beyond where the Palace Theater used to be. I was trying to think of that name, but it was a good restaurant too. But they didn't have near the facilities for feeding them, but they had fewer students to feed back in those days. One thing I wanted to, again, these notes I made, when I was here in school, that was before the war. There were 3 exchange students here at the same time, one from France, one from Italy, and one from Germany. Emilia Pucci was from Italy. Umberto Sriva was from Germany, and Louis de Roche was from France. You know, Pucci, when I was in the army in Italy during the war, I saw where Pucci's home was, and Pucci really got famous as a dress designer and scarf designer and everything of that sort. Umberto Sriva became what would be in this country Secretary of Education for Germany, and Louis de Roche was with the French equivalent of Associated Press, and he came and visited over here after the war and brought with him moonstones. That's what he'd gotten, I guess, his contacts with the ones who went to the moon or something. But he had these moonstones that had come from the moon, and he brought them over here and brought them to the university for us to see. But they were 3 delightful people, but as I say, one French, one Italian, one German, and actually France was the only one that fought on the United States side. Germany definitely fought. Italy fought for a while and then stopped. But they were all close friends and got along fine here on campus.
Was Mr. Loris Artow the
Yeah.
foreign
Yeah,
international student
That's right.
coordinator at the time?
I was trying to think. I think she was here. I just don't remember in detail. But I wanted to mention them because I knew all 3 of them, and they were delightful people. And as I say, to be from 3 different countries like that, and the war coming a little later, it was remarkable what close friends they were.
And Gucci was later to design some scarves.
Yeah,
for the alumni.
that's right.
Pucci designed scarves for the
Pucci designed some scarves that was sent over here, and
Yeah.
I think I got some at home too.
Well, Mr. Butler, we thank you so much for being with us today. We've
Well-
enjoyed hearing.
Well, I didn't know I was going to talk that much, but when I started, I just kept on going.
we're
One
glad.
thing, how about some of the old traditions like Robert Frost?
Oh,
Remember that?
well, he and Hugh Hodson was the close friend. Anyway, one of the ones like that. And Robert Frost came here every year to give his lectures, and that was really one of the high points of the year. And a path not trodden, what is that?
The road not taken.
The road not taken, that's, yeah. But anyway, and we've had a lot of other delightful people and famous people who've been here on various programs. But
Claude's mentioned that. Talk a little bit about Hugh Hodson and how our Museum of Art, how Mr. Hodson was involved, and also Lamar Dodd. Could you talk a little bit about those two folks?
well, Hugh Hodson, my wife sang in a junior choir at St. Luke's Church in Atlanta, where Hugh Hodson was in charge of music. And so she goes back farther than any of us in her contact with Hugh Hodson. But he was a delightful person. He really did a tremendous amount to create a department of music. Is it a school now? I wouldn't be surprised they're making schools out of a lot of these departments. And Lamar Dodd started off with Mr. Holbrook was the one that came down from New York and gave a lot of his paintings that he had bought to set up the art museum. But Lamar really put University of Georgia on the map in the field of art, just as Hugh Hodson did for music.
You know, they're building a new art school out on East Campus now.
That's what I understand.
Yeah.
I haven't seen
Just
it.
gotten started, so
Uh-huh.
it's coming along. Think anybody else, Claude? We ought to get you to talk about Jean Butler. Would you talk about Jean Butler a minute?
Well,
How you met her and
well, I'll tell you the story. She'll be surprised if she sees this. But no, I went with her roommate. She was a Tridelt here at Georgia, and I went with her roommate. Well, that was before the war, and after the war was over, she had married somebody else. So I wrote. Jean married to Bill Reed, and his father, Bill Reed's father, was head of the botany department and known as Botany Reed here back in, but he died in '36, so that was a long time ago. But when I was in Italy, I found out that Bill Reed had been killed. He was shot down with the 8th Air Force over one of the German cities, and I wrote Jean a note of sympathy from Italy. And so she wrote, I had my address on that, so she wrote me back. And then after I got back home, I kept in touch with her and went over to see her in Atlanta. And then I decided that I would, summer came along, and I said, well, I'm going to summer school at Emory. I didn't need to, but I majored in American history all the way through graduate programs. So I went to Emory and take some history and psychology courses there. Well, the main reason I went there was there to be close to Jean. So during that period, it got closer and closer, and I asked her to marry me, and fortunately for me, she said yes. But Jean, I want to say a word about her. She's the controlling author of Correct Writing, which was put out first by D.C. Heath, and now and it has sold, at last report, and that was several years ago, sold over 2 million copies, because it's an English grammar book, and it's been used all over the United States and Canada and other places. But the last report, which was some few years back, it had sold 2 million copies.
Richard was bragging on Miss Jean the other day about selling.
You can be sure my grammar has improved since I married her, because if I made an error, she let me know. But
She taught too.
oh yeah, she taught. She taught for 10 years.